How's it going, everyone? We are back with another deck profile today. Today we have something that a lot of you have probably already seen before, but we are going to be going through a red Omnimon deck profile that I ran in a tournament and have played some games with recently. Although there are already a lot of them out there, I just wanted to go ahead and share mine and the kind of little bits of differences that I put into my deck. If you've watched any other red Omnimon deck profiles, it will share some similarities, but again, just this is my version of it that I have had some success with in my recent games and the version that I've been enjoying the best so far. I brought this deck to a local tournament this past week and did pretty well with it. Won 3 games, had 1 loss. The match that I did lose was especially rough during the first game of the set, as I ended up having 4 Omnimon in my opening hand, which is probably the most awful brick hand I've ever had in this game. Didn't end up actually drawing a rookie, I think, until like 5 or 6 turns in. So by then, there was really no hope. It was just level 6s and level 7s. Really painful to play through. But for overall, I felt like this deck does pretty well against most matchups. Obviously, there were some that were better, some that were worse. But outside of that tournament, I have also been doing pretty well with this deck against a lot of different other types in games I've played. So, gonna go ahead and get straight into it. And I do want to say real quick, thank you to all my recent subscribers. My channel has been growing a little bit quicker this past month, and I broke over that 100 subscriber barrier that about a week ago, and I've just been continuing to gain. So thank you all for the support, and I hope you all enjoy this video. We will, of course, be starting off with our Digi-Eggs. We run 4 Gigimon, kind of the standard best red level 2 most decks are running right now. Just give us that extra attack power when our opponent has 5 or more cards in their trash. Pretty much probably the best egg for most decks right now. And then for our 5th one, we run the Koromon. Not as good, but still serves that same purpose of just trying to buff up our Digimon. Kind of obnoxious to have to wait till you have 4 more Digivolution cards, but since we are trying to build up to our level 7s in this deck and get straight to Omnimon, it will still serve that purpose of helping make sure our Omnimon is just a little bit stronger to help make sure he survives when swinging through security and doesn't have to worry about swinging into another Omnimon. Moving on to our level 3s, we run 14. We start off with, of course, the 4 copies of the starter deck Agumon, the best red level 3 when you're just looking to buff up the power on your Digimon. Super awesome, just always gets that extra 1,000. This is probably our ideal rookie to start off with when we were first building our Digimon. On top of him, we also run 1 Guilmon, just to have a little bit more extra damage there. Didn't feel the need to run any more Guilmon, especially since there were some other level 3s that I liked that I'm putting in this deck. But I just like having that kind of 5th card in there just to help make sure I have a higher chance of getting some extra power for my Digimon as I'm building them up. Next up, we have 4 copies of the set 1.5 Biomon. Just super cool card on deletion if it's your turn. Gain 1 memory. Just really cool, awesome way. Red doesn't really have a lot of ways to get more memory, so this card is just awesome. Throw it down if you have the memory to end your turn, and if he's still around the next turn, just have him swing in security. If he survives, okay, great, you have an extra Digimon, but ideally, he's probably just gonna crash into security, take himself out, and then you get that 1 extra memory, giving you a little bit more to do with the turn. Hilarious when you swing into an opponent's giant monster, like something, and I think in my tournament I swung into an Omnimon. Super awesome use of the card. But yeah, just really strong level 3 right now for red. Definitely enjoy running her at 4. We also run 2 copies of the vanilla 2-cost Biomon. Again, just having those 2-cost cards is really good. With the turbo deck, obviously we're trying to have as cheap, cost-efficient terms as we can, so just having those 2 costings to play and set your opponent to 1 can be really good. And it's just always nice to have like cheap options. And to finish up, we have 3 copies of the Monodramon. Same reasoning as the Biomon, running 2 and 3 just to help out with the potential Omnimon matchup, or if you have a bunch of small enemies on the board, trying to minimize the chance of all of them to get deleted, since of course he deletes everything with the same name. So that's why we have 3 Monodramon and 2 Biomon instead of 4 and 1. So yeah, in total, 14 level 3s. I do not dare run any less than this, since in any deck, whenever I'm running anything under 14 rookies, it just seems like I never have it and have way too many dead hands at the start of the game. This felt like a pretty good amount of me. Don't feel like I could squeeze in any more, but also don't feel like I could accept any less in this deck. Moving on to our level 3s, this is one of the areas where I felt like I had the tightest fit of trying to cram as many Digimon I could into here. Of course, we start off with 4 copies of the Dark Tyrannomon, 1 cost to Digivolve into. Just the best champion to have for just Digivolving straight up when you're trying to get there as fast as possible. Super nice when you happen to have them at the opening turn, especially if your opponent set you to 1 memory. That way you could still Digivolve and still have that memory to do something else. On top of him, we run 4 copies of the Security +1 attack Greymon. Again, super powerful. Just being able to build up and make sure our level 6s and level 7s and of course our level 5s can swing for some extra attack can be really useful, really helps us get the game ending earlier. We don't really need to worry about attack power so much, since of course we're swinging with Omnimon ideally, so he's already super strong. So just capitalizing on that with some extra security attack, super nice. And to top off on that, we have 4 copies of the Cordramon, because of course blockers are important in this game. And it's just, even though he's not really ideal to Digivolve into, especially if you're in an aggressive point in the game and you're trying to push your advantage, he is crucial, and you just always need those blockers in case your opponent's swinging at you quick, especially when going against something like Rookie Rush. Moving on to our level 5s, pretty much keeping things simple. We just have our 4 copies of Groundramon, of course, because he is 2 cost, and we're just trying to get the cheapest options we can. There aren't really any level 5s for red that have super amazing effects that we're really trying to force into the deck. Really, we're getting enough that we're what we want from the rookies, the champions, and from our megas themselves. So we just want the cheapest options, and to go along with that, we of course also run 4 copies of the Lava Garidamon. So we have 8 2-cost ultimates to Digivolve into in total. Really nice, just trying to get through there as fast as we can. And just as our one option outside of that to include, we have our 1 copy of Skull Greymon, just for, handling those blockers. Really nice to sometimes be able to throw them out, just delete something from your opponent's side of the field. And of course, then he is still there on the board, so assuming your opponent doesn't take him out, then you can Digivolve into him. And if your opponent does take him out, then they at least had to waste some resources to get rid of the Skull Greymon. So either way, pretty good. Doesn't come up often enough where I felt the need to run more, but definitely you always probably want these 8 copies of both Lava Garidamon and Groundramon. You could maybe cut the Skull Greymon, but these 8 are the crucial ones you want to help you turbo into Omnimon. And at times, Lava Garidamon can be useful for just swinging at your opponent, especially if they're already down and kind of you have them on the defensive. There's times where swinging with Lava Garidamon isn't the worst. 8,000 DP plus any potential buffs you have from the rookies or the eggs, you could potentially get her up to 10,000. And then Groundramon is always kind of just nice because, while ideally you're not throwing down or hard casting a card, if you're gonna play something, 5 isn't the worst cost, and it can be nice too when your opponents have to make a big play themselves and give you some extra memory. Throwing out a Groundramon isn't the worst if that's all you have, especially since that means you're pretty close to getting to those level 7s your next turn. Moving on to our level 6s, I think this is where things get the most interesting with this deck and what you can do. Currently, what I was using at this tournament, I ran 3 copies of Phoenix Mon. Phoenix Mon, of course, important. 2 cost, level 6, really just trying to capitalize, get the cheapest turns you can, and also set your opponent at 1 memory whenever possible. In addition to Phoenix Mon, we ran 2 copies of Blitz Greymon. Blitz is a really cool card. The ability to de-digivolve your opponents while situational, can be really useful, and also just setting them back those resources and those cards that they needed to build up can be really good, especially if your opponent just happens to not have the cards they need to build back up. It can help get rid of any problematic Digimon. I will say he is probably the most situational card in here, and personally the one I would probably prefer cutting if I was going to change the level 6s at all, which I will get to in a little bit. Also, that 4 cost is expensive. If you are using his effect really well, then it can be worth it. But he is kind of one of the options I might consider changing numbers on. Moving on next, probably my favorite level 6 I ran that ended up being super helpful. We have our 1 copy of Durandamon. Super awesome to be able to give piercing to our Omnimons. Really useful. Came in super clutch when I was playing against a black deck. While I had the advantage, they at one point were able to get a bunch of blockers on the board, which means they could have potentially stalled and somehow brought things back. But then I was able to get the piercing on my Omnimon I brought out, which was super fun and super awesome because it just meant I could swing through everything they had, didn't have to worry about it. So I think running one of these is super fun and really useful against either decks to have a bunch of blockers, so especially black, and also super nice if your opponent's just swinging with a lot of monsters. It's nice to be able to take out one of their suspended Digimon and also still inflict that security check, especially if you have security attack +1. Yeah, just super awesome card. I don't think I see that many Omnimon decks running it. I've seen a couple, but this was probably my favorite card and definitely the one that I would not consider cutting out, just because it comes in super clutch. And then last up, 2 copies of Volcanic Dramon, because Rookie Rush is a very big thing right now. We do run Ultra S in this deck, so just having 1 Volcanic Dramon could be good, but I found at times, especially if Rookie Rush, if they got a really strong start and they're just ramping things up, sometimes you don't really have the time to build up to an Omnimon. Sometimes you need to get something out there faster, which is why I was running the 2 copies of Volcanic Dramon. If I was going to change any of these ratios at all, I would probably cut down on 1 Blitz Greymon for an additional Phoenix Mon. As cool as Blitz Greymon is, and as much as I like his effect, it didn't actually end up coming in that useful for me as often as I would have liked to, or as often as I think could justify having him in the deck. For now, I'm keeping him at 2, just for those what ifs and the situations where it does come up. But there were times where I kind of just wished he was a Phoenix Mon in my hand, so I could Digivolve up cheaper. Again, that 4 cost 2 can hurt sometimes. And, you know, if your opponent has something on the board that de-Digivolving it is super crucial and really helps you in the moment, then it's great. But then there's times where maybe, especially you're playing against an opponent who isn't doing a lot of Digivolving, or something like Shine Greymon, where you're scared that if you de-Digivolve them, they're just going to go back into Shine Greymon now, and then you're going to have to pay twice for those Shine Greymon nukes. So as much as I like this card and want to keep him in, if I was going to change any of these ratios at all, it would probably be 1 Blitz Greymon down to add 1 more Phoenix Mon. Again, you could get rid of a Volcanic Dramon, especially since we are running Ultra S, but I also felt having the 2 Volcanic Dramon was good, and really my deck, between the Ultra S's Volcanic Dramon, felt super safe against Rookie Rush, and felt like it could really handle all those lower level Digimon some decks like to spam out. Moving on to the headlining man himself, we have 3 copies of the Set 1 Omnimon, you know, the OG with his deletion effect, and then we also run 2 copies of Ultra S for the potential board wipe, and just any enemies who are swinging super wide at you. This felt like the best amount to me. Having 5 really seemed good. There's times, you know, where maybe Omnimon, you have like 2 in your security, and then that, as nice as that is when it wipes out your opponent, it also sucks because, you know, you're going to have to work that much harder to dig through the deck to get to. And then also just, yeah, the increased chance of having a security, increased chance of knowing you can get to him. 3 of this Omnimon seemed like a good amount balanced with the 2 Ultra S, because there's a lot of times, you know, sometimes you just want to delete 1 big target, sometimes you want to board wipe. This ratio really helps make sure we're covered for all of the situations we would want. And now moving on to what is probably the most controversial decision I have made for myself in this deck. I only run 2 copies of Gaia Force. When playing and watching other people's decks, I saw a lot of people running 3. A lot of decks, yeah, just running 3 where like the 4th one didn't hurt a lot. Because of course, if you're running 4, sometimes that can clog up your hand. Sometimes, because obviously you would prefer to see the security, And if you have 4, there are a lot of situations where sometimes you just run into 2 or even 3 in your hand, and it's really just a draw that you need to be a Digimon or something else. And not having more can hurt sometimes. Sometimes you're just praying for those Gaia forces in your security or to come up in your hand to get something really good. But honestly, with the Omnimons we're running too, that takes care of a lot of situations and helps out with our room removal. And including more Gaia forces meant cutting other Digimon that I was not willing to cut. 14 rookies, was not willing to lower that all out. A lot of people I see running 11 level 4s champions, but honestly, I just couldn't bring myself to cut any of them. Tyrannomon, super important because he's like the cheapest Digimon. He really helps us speed to Omnimon. But the security attack was also nice, and there were times where I was missing that, and I really liked having the Greymon. Cordramon, I considered cutting down to 3. But through my gameplay, there were times where I was really happy to have him at 4, where I needed more blockers. I needed something to get out there quick to defend myself. And honestly, in terms of getting the Gaia Force, because of how consistent the rest of the deck can be with your Digivolution, your ability to Digivolve up quickly, especially with the ratios I had, I felt like only having 2 wasn't a problem. I never felt like I just couldn't get to Gaia Force. There were so many times where I still managed to draw 1, or I managed to draw both, even while only running 2. And as far as the security goes, I still manage to get Gaia Force and security sometimes. And even if he's not there, chances are I have an Omnimon in there, which doesn't help with jamming, but it does help with Digimon. Honestly, if one of my opponents saw this video, he would probably be so upset. My last game, my first security check of game 1 was a Gaia Force. Super saved me. Game 2, I would have lost if my last card wasn't Gaia Force. If he knew I only had 2 in the deck, and the chances of how slim it was that last card was Gaia Force, he would probably be pretty tilted. But yeah, again, it would be nice to run more. But for this deck, I felt really having those ratios for all of the other Digimon was way more important and helped make up for the fact that I only had these 2 Gaia Force. This is the only option I run in this deck. Only Tamer, or no Tamers. Really just trying to focus on Digivolving and getting up there as quick as possible. And that is the deck, everyone. Again, very similar to a lot of the decks out there. Just a few changes for myself. Mostly, of course, just running 2 copies of Gaia Force. Most decks I see run a little bit more. And then also running that Durandamon. I don't see that too often. Really cool card. And yeah, just my take on the ratios and what has worked the best for me so far. Decks I faced again. We of course have like the Mirror Red Omnimon that comes up a lot right now. I felt like my deck pretty much stood at least toe-to-toe with all of the ones I've seen and ended up practicing again, both events, both online and in person. I actually have not ran into a Yellow Shine Greymon deck with this, thankfully, but also it is a deck I would like to practice more against. That is probably going to be one of the toughest situations to handle, since the Shine Greymon has the potential to just set you back so far. But at the same time, if you're going up, you're getting the right cards, and you're able to speed up to your Omnimon as quick as possible, I think you can kind of control the tempo and kind of just try to blitz through their security as quickly as you can. Gone against Black, that's where the 1 copy of Skull Greymon and the Durandamon really helps out with that piercing. Win against a Imperial Dramon deck, that was probably my closest matchup and no one that was really rough for me. But just playing smart, knowing when to drop Volcanic Dramon, knowing when to just when to defend and kind of how to get around the piercing that kind of the green line has, when just like the unsuspending abilities of the blue Digimon in the deck. If you play it carefully, you can come out on top. The deck that did beat me was purple. Just something about the ability for them to just keep bringing stuff out. I had a hard time taking stuff out while also defending myself, especially since they were getting really good draws and they had like a really fun, well-built deck that was able to potentially basically just keep shutting me down every time I tried to build something back up, and I just couldn't get what I needed fast enough compared to how much they were able to just spam out little Digimon as purple does. Green isn't really too much of a problem for this, so really probably like the worst matchup would be your Shine Greymon. It's not awful, you just have to really know to be careful. Against everyone else, just be aggressive. That's what red is. Sometimes you're kind of like scared to throw something. There's times where you just need to throw a big expensive card down. Not ideal. but it can set you up for something bigger later. There were times where I just threw out a level 5, which I didn't want to do, but just because I needed something big out there or I had no other options left, and sometimes ended up paying off because as long as that thing was able to stay on the board, I was able to go into Phoenix Mon, and then from there just bring out an Omnimon. But yeah, that is my deck. I've been winning more games than I've been losing with it. Really enjoy it. If you do try it out, let me know what you think of the ratios. Let me know what your own kind of variations or changes are. I hope this helps you with your own Red Omnimon decks. If you're looking to try out just different ratios or different Digimon with it, I hope you enjoy something from this one. And yeah, thank you for watching the video. Leave a like if you liked the profile, and I will see you in the next one.